Hello, hello. This time it is special. It's Tenpai time. Let's just get into it, right? So as promised, here is the Fiend Smith Bystial Tenpai list that I've been having a ton of fun with. We climbed up to master rank with this, so I just think that this is such a solid list. And this is primarily for going second. I think that's very important to call out. You could build this deck to go first, right? Put in those stupid like Mayakashi and transaction rollback cards to play off of a Beatrice engine with your Fiend Smiths and do your whole FTK going first or whatever and then Tenpai them. But I don't like that because I think that you're going to have to play bricks more than maybe you already have in the deck. And this deck is trying to have as many live cards as possible. And if you're going second, you don't have to worry about that. And worst case, if your opponent forces you to go first, you got plays. You got your Fiend Smith engine to get going there. But yeah, let's go ahead and break down the engines in this deck, and then I'll kind of cover any cards that I miss along the way. So I do want to start with our Tenpais, right? This is kind of the heart and soul of the deck. So with this engine in particular, you have a little bit of a unique ratio here on double Pydra, double Genroku. The reason is there are times you want to have as slim of a Tenpai engine as possible. Really, one Tenpai card does it so long as it's not Fadra. And the double Genroku, I was playing one for a while, but it came up where I needed that second one after they banished my Chandra and hit my tuner. So you do want double Genroku access, in my opinion. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. You've got your Sangen summoning and you got your Kaimens. And the way I think about using this part of the engine is you do this last. So you bait out your opponent's interruptions and everything else with your other engines, board breakers, whatnot. And then when your opponent is on very little cards or nothing left, every other card, you have full information, then you drop your Tenpais and go for game. And you're going to have to be careful with it too, because there are times where you're going to have to break boards and deal with multiple interruptions with only your Tenpais after you've used all your other resources. So, that's something to consider. Genroku going into your Chandra to play around Ash Blossom is a thing, right? You have to know when to use your Tenpais in this deck, and that's something I could not stress enough. And that's why we're going with the hard second. You'll see all the hand traps in here too, right? So I think that's all. And then, yeah, for your Tenpai engine, it's pretty slim, as you can tell. We have so many other things we're trying to pack in here that we still made space for double Biden. Gotta have that shit. But besides that, yeah, this is a very slim engine at best. So looking at our Bystials here, you'll notice we have a double Druisworm, slightly higher Bystial count. That is because Bystials are freaking phenomenal this format. Being able to hit Fiendsmiths out of the graveyard is just incredible. So you got to have a higher Bystial count, in my opinion, and Druis is the best board breaker. So I love these 4 Bystials. They come up all the time. And, the best way is when your opponent, if you want to hit the Fiendsmith engine, when they're trying to set up this Lacrima play, you'll probably, they target their Engraver, and then you'll just respond with your Bystial and get that Engraver shit out of there. The other thing is you might also hit their Engraver when it's trying to special summon itself back. Doesn't come up as much, but it definitely is something to consider. Sometimes you're hitting Lurie, so yeah, there are times where you're using this Bystial engine to its full extent. And then we are on the triple Lubellion, and this thing's primary job is actually just to bait out hand traps. I want them to ash this, right? When they ash your Lubellion and you're sitting on a Kaimen in your hand, you feel so good. Ash does actually hurt Tenpai quite a bit, and so being able to bait that with the Lubellion and then setting up your Regained is fantastic. We'll talk about the Regained here too. This thing is your main grind. This thing helps you stay in the game by netting you draws and summons. This plus the Fiend Smith engine grinds very, very well. So we are on the single Regained. That's it. No Beast. There is necessarily an argument for Beast, or there is an argument for Beast, but I don't know if I see a spot for it in this specific build, just because it's one more dead card when you're going second, and you want those to be hand traps for your opponent. So there's that, not to mention the fact that, if you draw it, it's shit. You want to place it off of Lubellion, and then, obviously there's a play where you could use the seals to, tribute it off. And it's not a bad card. I just think that in this very, very tight deck, there's not a lot of space for extra fluff, where we already have forms of spot removal through the Fiendsmith engine that I just don't think that there's necessarily space for it right now. Now, for the actual Fiendsmiths themselves, we do have, obviously, double Engraver. We play 3 if we could, right? And then I am on, of course, a single Lurie and a double Tract here. You could slim it down and play 1, but I actually want this at 2 because I want a hard open Tract sometimes. You're not always going to see Engraver at 2. And so you need, essentially, like, extra copies. And obviously seeing engravers better, right, in hand, because then you're getting your engraver access. You'll get to 2 engravers if you see 1 in your hand, because you'll use 1, grab the track to grab Lurie then discard, Lurie summons itself out, Lurie goes into the Requiem goes into your other engraver, and the first engraver's in deck, or in your graveyard, which you can then use its effect to bring itself back, right? So that is probably the best play, is having 2 engraver, but you're not always going to have that. And, again, similar to the Lubellion play here too, your Fiendsmiths at worst are baiting Ash Blossom, baiting your opponent's interruptions, getting them to waste resources, so that way you can then go into your Tenpais and finish the job. So yeah, I am a big fan of double tracked, and then obviously we're running the extra deck cards as well. So the Requiem, the Moon to turn any 2 monsters into Fiendsmith combo, your Sequence to fusion summon out. And this comes up, both of these come up, right? Your Lacrima getting to burn for a little extra damage is fantastic, right? That makes the job of killing your opponent in 1 turn slightly easier. Lacrima can then set up an Appaloosa, which is great, or just generate more bodies. It's really busted, probably should go. And then for the Desiree, of course, this thing is your negate, right? You sense your opponent has like an imperm or something like that. You might want to set up your Desiree first before going into your Tenpais, just because you can play around that a little bit better, protect your plays. So there's that. Not to mention the fact that, and we're not playing the trap, right? So when the Crimson Tears comes out, that Lacrima comes out, we might consider playing the trap in the main deck, but as it stands right now, the trap is just a little bit harder to access in this deck, so I am not playing that. But there are still ways to get this send effect off, right? You might hard make the Desiree and then link it off to then get more removal, right? So I actually think that you need to play the full Tenpai, or the full Fiendsmith engine here. And then we've got our Caesar as well. Sometimes this is really good to make over an Appaloosa, especially if you know your opponent's going to be on Tenpai. Appaloosa loses to Tenpai a little bit worse. It makes itself weaker once it's down to 1600, right? Pydra's running over it, whereas no Tenpai main deck monster is running over Caesar. And it's still a double interruption. So, this could be 3 or 4 interruptions. This is only 2, but getting to negate and destroy really does come up. And, this can also protect yourself from Nibiru as well. So I personally think that you got to play the Caesar as well. And then that actually covers it for the 3 main engines of the deck. So in terms of your board breakers, we are on a lot. And your board breakers and hand traps. Now you're going to notice something, right? We're not on Imperm. And the main reason for that is really, it does have a little bit of negative synergy with Druis Worm. And, like I was saying, in this deck, we really don't have the luxury of having cards that conflict. Every card needs to be live. There are going to be times where you don't have your hand traps, and so you need your engine to break the boards. And so having to choose between Imperm or Bystial is really hard to do right now, especially with Fiend Smith running amok. So, yeah, I personally am on the Veilers instead. And then, of course, we're running double Maxi. You got to do that. Ash Blossom, mostly to stop Charmies and Maxi, and then maxing out on the Charmies too. I've seen a lot of Fluanderees actually, so this obviously hits them, and then White Forests are all trying to summon from the hand, and so getting your Perulias is just as important as getting to Fualos as well. So I really love the maximum number of Charmies, and then we do have the single copy of Nib just to punish those who are taking the challenge. And then Duster comes up all the time. People are relying on their back row for all sorts of recursions, so getting that all taken care of is great. Don't forget, when you are trying to hit their back row and they have the Azamina guy up, this negate dude, this thing does tribute itself, right? So you're going to want to make sure you droplet that first, then go after their back row. That did come up for me, unfortunately. And then, of course, right, for the best board breaker in the game, it's going to be Droplet. Talents does a lot for sure, but Droplet really deals with everything, and not being able to allow your opponent to respond with anything. Besides traps, I guess that's the one thing that we're not running in this deck, but, we don't have space for it. And like I said about the Imperms, slight conflict, I need everything to be live. So that is it for the main deck. And then for the extra deck, I talked about our 2 fusions. We're still on the double Bident. You're going to use this mostly to recur out your Tenpais from the graveyard, which are either going to be Fadra or Chandra, right? Those are the ones where we don't have as much main deck access to them, so these are kind of your extra copies. Trident comes up all the time, of course. Transcendent, I don't need to say anything about that card. The Striker SP line, it's there, right? You do need extra removal sometimes. You might not be able to kill your opponent, and so with that, the SP is there for some extra insurance. If you're forced to go first. You can make a seal, but with this Tenpai list, it's not just seal. You're probably setting up seal with a regain, or maybe a seal with an Appaloosa under it if you really comboed off or something like that. So there are multiple ways where you can have some decent going first engines, going first options. Heat is incredible, right? This thing is gonna get into your Fiendsmith, or your Tenpai engine if you have nothing else, right? You can make this with a fire, an Ash Blossom or something, and crash into your opponent and then go full Tenpai combo. And so you have to play Hita. And then we've got our Tenpai cards, and then of course Appaloosa, which you're mostly, or your Tenpai cards, your Fiendsmith cards, and then you're making Appaloosa mostly with your Fiendsmith engine. But yeah, that's another extra way of insurance, another going first option, really, really solid. But anyways, folks, I hope you enjoyed this brief insight into how the Tenpai list works. Again, you're running into a lot of White Forest, maybe some other Tenpais, and then Snake Eyes did get the power up with the new Azumina cards as well. So you're going to be dealing with a lot of that, but thankfully your Bystials are great at dealing with that fucking Beatrice at FTK. I hate that shit. And, you've got a bunch of other hand traps to stop your opponent's other plays. So, yeah, hopefully you're able to have as much success with the deck as I have, and, yeah, enjoy.